We're still dealing with the after effects of a foot of snow, which is kind of an unusual thing around here. But we appreciate you as friends of the archives, braving the elements to get out here today. We have a lot of fun around here. And some of the most fun things we do is discover what all the fun stuff we have in our vault. And so we've done this once or twice before, I believe. So for those of you who are not familiar, the title formally for today is "And More Fun Finds in the Vault." But we've got a lot of folks to share with you today, a number of staff members from both the archives and the Music Foundation, of items they found of interest which you may not suspect are hanging out in our Moravian archives. So to start off today, our Assistant Archivist, Nicole Crabbe. Thank you.
Morning, afternoon. Okay. So we're going to start things off with a bang and a very bad fun. Last year, when the doctor's house was being restored, Old Salem had me go downstairs to look for a few books that they have record that we had. So while going through all of our uncatalogued books, I ran across a book that I thought was kind of interesting, something you wouldn't expect to find in the Moravian archives. And that is Military Pyrotechny for the use of the cadets of the United States Military Academy at West Point, printed in 1832. And it has instructions on how to create gunpowder, sulfur, how to mix them, how to put the spike in the ground. I mean, it goes into a lot of detail, recipes for making it, dimensions of fuses. And then in the back are several fold-out lithographs showing the cadets how to do this. And I'll put this on the table for you to look at afterward.
Nicole, is this like the original anarchist cookbook?
Yes, exactly. Let's see. So in the front of the book is inscribed, the first inscription says, "For Colonel Shaver of North Carolina, with the compliments of Lieutenant Z.J.D. Kingsley." It doesn't have a date on that inscription, but I did what most people do. Initially, I went to Google, and I Googled the title, and I came up with this. This book was originally printed in 1832, so this is the first edition. And it says here, "Printed as a textbook for cadets to accompany a series of lectures on the production of explosive ordnance. The work has been described to Captain Minor Milton, an assistant professor of mathematics at the Military Academy." But there's some question about whether or not he actually wrote it. They said that it would seem more likely that an accomplished professor of civil and military engineering, Zabina J.D. Kinsley, likely wrote it, which is interesting considering that he's the one who gave it to Colonel Shaver. And then it goes on to explain that there were fewer than 100 copies of this initial one made and printed. They continued to print them through the 1840s for the use of the cadets. So the next question was, who is Colonel Shaver? So I went to what we normally do around here, our version of Google, and that's the records of the Moravians in North Carolina to 1832. And so I started looking around, and I found who it is for the most likely candidate, which I think that this will confirm. Colonel Emanuel Shaver. He was the son of Gottlieb Shaver. He was a Moravian. He lived in Salem. He was an attorney. He was postmaster. He was a notary public. And he was the captain of the local volunteer militia, the Salem Light Infantry. according to the Salem Diary, May 26, 1832, Brother Emmanuel Shover, captain of the local voluntary military company, left for West Point, New York, in order to attend the examinations of the military academy there. So, here it is. He went to West Point in 1832, and while he was there, he was given a copy of this book. The second inscription, however, reads, Francis Freeze, 1848, whoever borrows this book will please return it as soon as he has the information desired. Francis Freeze. So how did Francis Freeze end up with Colonel Shover's book? Well, Colonel Shover died unexpectedly in 1846, and Francis Freeze was the executor of his estate. So, and of course, in Francis Freeze's papers, we have the files on the estate of Emmanuel Shover. And although it does list that he has a book of his library, it doesn't list the title of the books. That section of all the sections is actually missing in the estate records. Everything else is there, but what lists his books. According to the will, the books are supposed to go directly to his widow. But I imagine that she probably took one look at this and decided that she didn't need it in her collection. So anyway, I thought that was a neat thing that we had in our archives. And again, I'm going to put all the publications over here for you to look at. A quick thing to talk about. In looking through the records for something to fill in on Facebook for our On This Day in Moravian History, I ran across this in the Salem Board Minutes, May 18, 1803. We wish that our congregation library could be enlarged by degrees. There is a large collection of the Universal Magazine, for which no subscription was sent in recent years, and we would like to have it brought up to date. So, of course, I went down to the vault and looked and found the Universal Magazines. The Universal Magazine, and I'll explain what it is. The Universal Magazine of Knowledge and Pleasure was a periodical published in London in the period between 1747 and 1814 by John Hinton. It advertised itself as dealing with letters, debates, essays, tales, poetry, history, biography, antiquities, voyages, travels, astronomy, geography, mathematics, mechanics, architecture, philosophy, medicine, chemistry, husbandry, gardening, and other arts and sciences, which may render it instructive and entertaining, to which will be added an impartial account of books in several languages and of the state of learning in Europe, and of the new theatrical entertainments. So, it was a variety of information.
Universal.
It was universal. And so what you will find when you go through here, letters, political debates, plays, engravings, maps. There are a lot of maps found in these that you can fold out. But what I found most interesting, of course I haven't really looked through them, but in the beginning here, the Moravian minister or whoever at the time went through and made note of what they thought was interesting that they wanted to go back and find later. So you have things like painting techniques and stone and gravel solvent. There are things to cure if you get bit by a mad dog. Let's see, cure for dropsy, the whole art of physics, characteristics of males and females, opium, the culture thereof. That was interesting, but I also got tickled at this, and I'll put it over here for you to see. Amongst all of these things, like how to make your hair grow, and how to make Prussian blue with quicklime, the effects of electricity. In here he wrote, serpent fighting the buffalo. So he thought it was important enough to note that so he could go back and find that quickly when he wanted to read about a serpent fighting a buffalo. Okay, something that is a fun find in the vault. Of course, these things have all been seen before, so if they're not new discoveries, they're just rediscoveries, I guess you could say. And I'm sure Richard knows what this is. And looking through our uncatalogued photo file this summer, I ran across this book and opened it up. And the first thing you see is Spangenberg. And most people have seen this image. You've seen this exact image if you've looked in volume 4 of Records of Moravians. But a lot of people said they've seen this image, but the reverse, with Spangenberg sitting on the other side of the table, and that's correct. That's the version that most people see. Craig Atwood wrote an article that was published in the Journal of Moravian History about Spangenberg writing the Idea Fidea. This is what he has. And this is what most people see. This is what most people recognize. But he notes here at the bottom, August Spangenberg, silhouette pasted on watercolor by Alexander Glitch, 1899. Copy from an 18th century original in a private collection in Herrenhue that was sold to the J.W. Freese family in Salem in 1899. J.W. Freese, John William Freese, was the father of Adelaide Freese. And he was elected to be a representative at the General Synod in Herrenhue in 1899. So that puts him in Herrenhue at the right time. This copy of the original is in the Records of the Moravians, and it's credited to Adelaide Freese's personal collection. So by that time, she had the book herself. It was given to the archives in 1975 by, let's see, Mrs. R.A. McQuiston. That would be Margaret McQuiston, yeah. And it was put in an envelope. It was put in an envelope in uncatalogued files, and there it's been. But you can see, you go through it, it's full of silhouettes. A lot of them are unidentified, unfortunately, but a lot of them are identified. Of course, there's Spangenberg, and there are several copies. Christian Breger's in here. Johannes von Vaudeville is in here. I'll set this out so you need to look through. But you can tell that it's, I'm amazed at how black the black is in these silhouettes. I mean, these things have been covered up and put away for a long time. And the Freese family interest, of course, they're descended from a lot of these families, but Jacob Conrad Freese is actually in here as well. And he was the patriarch of the Freese family that came to Salem. So I'm sure that's part of their interest in this. I looked through some of the correspondence with John W. Freese and couldn't find where he mentions actually purchasing this. Maybe it'll turn up someday, but.
I've been here 4 years, and so a lot of what's down the vault is a discovery for me. However, one of the things that I came across was from the Herbst collection, which I figured was a done deal, a static collection. I've been working a lot over the last 4 years with the Herbst collection to make sure that all the records are cataloged and edited on Gemeincap. And now they're also all on RISM. That just got finished up a couple of weeks ago. But in the process of going through the Herbst collection, I found something that wasn't in Gamache's catalog, which was published in 1970, So sometime between 1970 and now, or within the last 4 years, so within the last almost 50 years, something else was added to the Herbst collection, which made it a discovery for me. And it was a composition by Johann Gottfried Schicht, a composer with whom I was not familiar. It's an oratorio called Die Feier der Christen auf Golgotha, and it was a setting of text by C.C.H. Rost. It's about 77 pages, and there's an example of what it looks like. The German script, although I've had training in it, it's still hard to make out, so I was fortunate to find another record on the internet for just the libretto of the oratorio, and so that was very helpful in getting all the words right. And went ahead and set about going to put this in finale to make a modern edition. Well, you get to the last few pages and they start looking like that. Fortunately, Herbst's copy is not the only copy in Moravian collections. There is a set of parts in the Bethlehem, in the Philharmonic Society of Bethlehem collection from when it was the Bethlehem Collegium Musicum. And so I was able to reconstruct the last movement or so from the parts from the Bethlehem collection. Johann Gottfried Schicht was born in 1753 in Reichenau, Saxony, part of Silesia, which is now part of Poland, and so it's been renamed. He studied in Leipzig, and he was one of the first conductors of the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig for about 25 years, after which he became the Thomas Cantor. Thomas Cantor is a role that you may be familiar with. Johann Sebastian Bach was Thomas Cantor for several decades before his death in 1750. He was one of a number of famous conductors of the Gewandhaus Orchestra. Others include Johann Adam Hiller, Karl Reinecke, and probably the most famous one, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. And also, as Thomas Cantor, as I mentioned, Johann Sebastian Bach held that post from 1723 to 1750. And you see his name, Schicht's name down here, several names down. Now, another thing I want to point out is we have music in our collections by all of these people, even Johann Sebastian Bach. The only thing that I found that we have is his cantata Ein feste Burg. But the other names, Hauer, Dolus, Hiller, Müller, Schicht, we have music in various collections, and especially in some of our manuscript book collections. And there seemed to be a lot of shifting back and forth between directors of the orchestras, which became the Gewandhaus Orchestra. First was the Große Konzert. It started as kind of a mimicking of the French idea of the Concert Spirituel, which had concerts in Lent and in Advent. And other iterations of that musical body began the Musikübende Gesellschaft and then finally developed the Gewandhaus Konzert. But you can see how some of these names that were in the line of succession of the Thomas Cantor from Bach were also conductors of that orchestra.
Hello, I'm Erik Salzwedel, business manager with the Moravian Music Foundation. Stretching the definition of fun finds, I thought I would show a few instruments recently donated to the Moravian Music Foundation by Charles B. Teskey, PhD, Faculty Emeritus with Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. Not exactly a discovery, but an item of interest. The most unique item is an instrument called a culo horn. So why donate these instruments to the Moravian Music Foundation? Well, there's a connection between the German National Church Organization of brass music and brass choirs and the Moravian Church. Mr. Teskey knew well of the Moravians and loved the culo horn. The Moravians in Herrenhood are recognized for having the first organized church brass choirs of the Reformation, beginning in 1731. Carl Friedrich Johannes Kulo lived from 1856 to 1941. Together with his father Eduard Kulo, he founded the German Protestant Posaunenchor. It's what we refer to as a church brass ensemble, the Posaunenchor movement. In the booklet, The Origin and Development of the Moravian Posaunenchor by Ben van den Bosch, he mentions that Johannes Kulo was familiar with the Moravian bands and was cultivating ensembles throughout the National Church of Germany, what we refer to as the Lutheran Church. He attended the 1927 Moravian Bläsertag, which was a convention of brass players. Several years later, the Moravians joined the National Posaunenchor organization. It was mandatory. In Hans-Jürgen Schall's 2012 article, Gloria sei der Geblasen, das Phänomen Posaunenchor, or They Play Gloria, the trombone choir phenomenon, he explains the use of the word Posaunenchor, which literally means trombone choir, by the Germans. That Martin Luther used the word posauna to represent not only trombones, but heavenly instruments or angelic sounds. So if we look at Psalm 150, praise him with the sound of trumpets, we know in English. Going back to the Luther Bibel, it is Lobet ihn mit Posaunen, praise him with trombones. Or the really correct way to translate from German to English and capture the meaning intended is praise the Lord with a well-balanced blended brass sound with rich sonorities. Because that is what the Posaunenchor is. That is what the word means to Germans. Not just lower sounding trombones as we know them, but all brass instruments blended together. So what we call a church brass choir, the Germans call a Posaunenchor. Johannes Kulo was borrowing from the Moravians, founding and developing a brass tradition within the National German Church. He experienced the blend of sound from French horns, trombones, euphoniums, tubas, but the trumpet on top at the soprano voice was not as good a match when the goal is to blend, which is the goal of the Posaunenchor. Trumpet is designed to cut through, high, bright, and loud. An English trait, not very German. The flugelhorn was available, and we can show the flugelhorn here. It had an almost as dark a sound as a French horn. Much like the horn, it was first used for signaling and communication because, of course, it was invented before valves were invented, so it was just a straight horn with a conical tubing and a flared bell. Flugel means wing, and these were used in the military. When the armies were stretched across a field, they would signal from wing to wing to each other. So it blew signals much like a bugle that we know of. As Herr Kulo was designing, valve instruments had been around for 80 years or so, and the Germans already favored rotary valves to pistons, so you'll see that he incorporated the rotary valves. He needed something special for the soprano voice, gentle, but with not quite as dark a sound as a flugel. Working in collaboration with the Bielefeld instrument maker Ernst David, he developed the Kulo horn for use by the ensembles. This one is made by Meister Dotzauer, a 20th century instrument maker. So what I'd like us to do, and this is a picture of Herr Kulo playing his Kulo horn. So what I'd like to do is maybe just have Mary Ellen Coleman play us a tune, or part of a tune, on the trumpet, and then we'll hear it on the flugelhorn, and then we'll hear it on the kuhlohorn. First, the trumpet. Now this is a flugelhorn, and so the trumpet is cylindrical, it has a straight tube all the way through until the flare of the bell, but the flugelhorn gets gradually larger through more of the instrument. So the flugelhorn is very popular, even in the 20th century it became popular in jazz and pop idioms, and it's a integral member of the British brass band tradition. But now the kuhlohorn, which is, yeah, just like the picture.
Yeah, but I didn't get to see the picture.
And now the kuhlohorn. So the questions, of course, are, was he successful in coming up with an instrument? Was it embraced by the German brass band tradition? And was it really necessary? So I think as we look back to the 19th century and early 20th century, trombone, brass instrument development and mini instrument development was much like high tech is today. Everybody was trying different things, different configurations. Every little tiny change in tubing or materials and that kind of thing was being tried. So we don't see a lot of kuhlohorns these days, even in Germany. So it's a really unique instrument. So that's the long part of it. Thank you.
I'm all about identifying stuff. So I have an example. I'm going to take you through the steps to identify.
Shoot the down arrow key, slide aside.
Okay, good. An unidentified sonata that was labeled unidentified #1 in the Lidditz Collegium Musicum collection. And this is, all we had was the second violin part. No title, no composer. And I've given you the snippet of the beginning. It's a largo and a minuet with trio that we had. So it was on 3 leaves of paper. And look at the pattern of the notes. It's helped me identify what this was. And we have the minuet with the trio down below. And I might make an aside note that we're getting a new scanner microfilm reader that will help us clear up some of that fogginess. Well, I had to figure out what this was. And I went to RISM, and I could find in RISM, searching by notes, I had to put in the notes, this popped up. And it is very much like, that series of notes is very much like that. Except this is the first violin part, but you can tell by the pattern that this is what it is. So I was rather pleased with that. And when I do this, I always go back to our collection to find out, do we have more of this? Was it in another collection? Because the Moravians shared things across locations. It could be in Lidditz, in Salem, in Bethlehem, in Nazareth, or wherever. So I did find something in the Philharmonic Society of Bethlehem collection, and it was labeled by its correct author, Johann Christian Bach, one of the Bach sons, and was identified correctly, and the copyist was Johann Friedrich Peter. And here's the number up at the top is the Philharmonic Society folder number. It's the Largo, it's that same pattern of notes. And it's a little hard to see, but it's minuet altern. And the second one, so we had two copies of this, one in Lidditz and one in Bethlehem. And the one in Bethlehem was in a collection that I named when I cataloged this thing as a collection of quintets, trio sonatas, and divertimentos in quartet form. It had no place of publication. It was, of course, it was manuscript, and it had no date. And the music inside this collection was by various composers. But on the collection title page, it said that Johann Friedrich Peter copied this the 27th of September, 1766. And that's really interesting because this Bach, Johann Christian Bach sonata was first published in 1765. And Johann Friedrich Peter was in Barbie seminary at that time. So he got this thing hot off the press, copied it before he moved to America. And so we have manuscript copies in Bethlehem, in the Philharmonic Society collection, and the second violin part in the Lidditz collection. So that's kind of how things unravel, but I run into these unidentified things.
John Christian Bach is the English Bach, right? He worked with Powell in England. So he was even interpreted at the time. Or was he?
I don't know. So that's my story. That's the process I go through.
Thank you very much.
Are you doing this one?
Nope, I'm not gonna use that, and we're a little bit behind, and I'm gonna attenuate my comments because, unfortunately, I don't have to do that level of detective work. I'm Erik Elliott, I'm the archivist at Moravian Archives. I just want to give you in 1-minute stories about 4 things, and then read you a Christmas story, if that's all right. We'll be out of here in about 5 minutes, if you'll hold on. Coming to a place that's organized by folks coming from Germany, it should not surprise you that we have a copy of Tacitus's book on Germania. It's a beautiful copy from 1749. What's interesting when you read this, and I'm not, my knowledge of Latin would be vene vide vice, I'm sorry, that's about it. But it's, of course, Latin and Greek were common languages for scholars. Tacitus, in his comments on the Germans, notes that they're very fond of the lot, which should ring interesting to Moravians. And I'll refer you to going online and reading the English translation about how they use the lot. And the way they use the lot is they take strips of birch twigs, and basically it's the same 3-lot system. Yes, no, and come back later. And the other thing that the Germans were fond of, according to Tacitus, who, by the way, never encountered the Germans, was sitting in Rome, but like all ethnographers in the Roman tradition, wrote about other people from a distance through rumors and whatnot. But he talks that the Germans were fond of talking to horses in the sacred grove, and nothing was assumed as a better omen than getting the right snort from a horse. I don't think the Moravians went there before. But that book, Germaniae, was an integral part when it was lost to civilization and rediscovered in a monastery in Hesse in the 15th century. And it was at a time when the German states, they stayed fractured up to the 19th century. But that idea of somebody else talking about the commonalities among the German peoples helped work into the psyche of what would become a future Germany. So we've got numerous copies of that. As somebody who's new, I always look at the name drops. You've probably heard we've got a copy of a letter from George Washington after his visit here. Well, I just thought we had something from John Adams. And the story of the John Adams thing, actually when I looked, and I'll show you the copy, the letter we have signed by, putatively, John Adams, is a copy, and there you see John Adams, John Hancock. But John Adams' signature does not look like that, and I'll show you on the table what it looks like. This is a copy of it. But what we do have is the correspondence sent to John Adams by a group of citizens in Stokes County in 1798, signed by the actual signature of Joseph Winston, for whom the town of Winston-Salem is named. It's a letter offering support to the president. Says, the French have suffered, we have suffered too many indignities at the hands of the French, and we're ready to go to war. You just tell us when. And the story behind this, it's not in the letter, is this was something, in an age where the news we hear about unindicted co-conspirators, it's called the XYZ affair. When England and the other nations of Europe declared war against France in early 1790s, George Washington said America will be neutral. And what happens when you're neutral is sometimes you get picked on by both sides. Our ships were attacked by both the British and both the French. The British, we got a treaty with them and they let us pass without trouble. The French kept bothering us. So when they sent a delegation at the start of John Adams' presidency to France to settle this issue, the France said, sure, fine, but you have to pay us some money. And there's a beautiful caricature, which I found online from the time period, where basically Colombia, the United States, is being shaken down by these Frenchmen. And in the official documents that explain the situation, the ambassadors from France who were asking the American delegation for money before they entered into negotiations were referred to as Messieurs X, Y, and Z. So the X, Y, and Z affair is actually the background to the letter from the residents of Stokes County, led by Brother Winston, complaining to John Adams, you stand your ground, we're going to fight these guys. But within a few years, there was quasi-war came to an end. A home version of Fun Finds in the Vault, you can do yourself, is pick an event in history. We have 250 years. Well, in the records that you can find at home, we've got records from 1752 to 1876, okay? All of that is published online. You can go to our website and find the things. Something that was a vivid memory to me was at the end of 1999, and then we had a repeat 2000, 2001. The Leonid meteor shower was amazingly prolific. 1,000 an hour. I took my folks up to the exit at Pilot Mountain and got on the hood. It's the only time I've ever seen a meteor shower where you saw pyrotechnic displays, you saw smoke trails. There's a vivid image. It started the Adventist movement because people, when they saw this display in the sky, were seriously concerned that the sky was falling. So I thought, oh my goodness, November 13th, 1833, what did the Moravians have to say about it? Well, it depends on who you read as a diarist. The folks in Friedberg and Hope left no record of it whatsoever. Apparently they were sleeping late that morning. The folks in Salem have a very matter-of-fact description of things. In clear, cold weather, there was seen a very peculiar natural phenomenon, shooting stars, frequently flashing in all directions and in various forms, lighting the sky until daybreak. Clearly not a very emotional response. But lo and behold, up in Bethabara, read this. This morning before daybreak, there was a peculiar appearance in the cloudless sky where thousands of fiery sparks flew out from a certain point in all directions. Many people, especially in the neighborhood, were so frightened that they believed the world was coming to an end. They left their homes before day and fled to their neighbors seeking protection. Well, that's a pretty exciting event compared to the shooting stars. It is the Christmas season, and I wanted to close with a story written by the first unpaid archivist for this place, Adelaide Fries, who many of our stories are here because of her collecting ability. And it's a radio script from 1947, which was the 200th anniversary of the start of the love feast tradition, or the Christmas tradition, of a candle wrapped in red. I don't have one wrapped in red, but actually, for purposes of this story, it probably is okay that I don't. You're about to find out why. This tradition started in 1747 when Bishop de Vaudeville, Johannes de Vaudeville, a young Moravian minister with a special gift for making religious meetings attractive to children, on Christmas Eve in 1747, he held a service for the children of Marienborn in Moravia. The account says that he first asked questions using first line of a hymn as the question to which the children replied by repeating the lines which followed. After the questions and answers, Brother Johannes, as they called him, told the children the Christmas story, stressing the great blessing prepared for earth on that first Christmas day, when love brought the Lord of glory down to live and suffer, and to atone for all mankind. He told them that this great love which filled the heart of Jesus ought to light a flame of love in the heart of every child, which should burn forever. He added that as a reminder of what he had told them, he would give to each of them a lighted wax taper tied with a small red ribbon, the flame to remind them of the flame of love, and the red of the ribbon to suggest the cost the Savior paid for their redemption. In 1762, a Christmas love feast was held for the children of Bethania, the second Moravian village in the Carolina forest. At the close of the love feast, each child received a lighted wax taper. The theme of the discourse was the flame of love, but there was no red ribbon, for none could be found on the frontier. However, those pioneer Moravians needed no outward sign to remind them of the sufferings of the Savior, to whom they were so wholeheartedly devoted, and of whom they spoke so often to their children. Today, Moravian ministers generally present the lighted taper as symbolic of the light which came into the world with the birth of Jesus, and as the congregation holds the lights aloft, it is in pledge that each one who holds the taper will spread the light abroad. But in this is the bicentennial year, 1947, of the lighted Christmas taper tied with a small red ribbon, and the flame of blood still burns, and the red glory of the frill still serves as a reminder of the atonement to which the night in Bethlehem led. And today, after 200 years, Moravian Christmas customs continue to bear their testimony that what the fathers wished of old, what the promises foretold, what the seers did prophesy, is fulfilled most gloriously. Thank you for being here today. May you have a blessed and Merry Christmas. And please, after you've taken a look at some of the original things, grab yourself some pieces of chocolate on the way out the door. Yes,
I have a question. You said these were unpublished. They're indexed, though, aren't they?
What?
What you were showing us. Do we have stuff that isn't indexed?
Yes, we do have stuff that isn't
Yeah, I'm
indexed.
sorry, yeah.
And
Yeah,
here's
we have
this
uncataloged.
is from the collection of Home Moravian Church, which of course was the public lending library for many years, where they had the Carnegie Library. So we've got a lot of stuff that's here. But of the manuscript items, many of our books you can find online. Moravian Mission Foundation, through their combined cataloging system, has it on there as part of WorldCat. And we do have some inventory hints from a 1942 survey that Elliott did of what our manuscripts hold, but we hope to have that rectified with a little better, more current online catalog this year. So thank you again for being here.